Welcome. It is wonderful to see all of you here. My name is Ann Wiley, and I have been serving as the president of the Friends of Nellquit for 6 years. As some of you know, I'm also a professor here of psychology and gender and women's studies, and have lived in the community in Franklin County for 34 out of 35 years. I want to thank you all for being here to support Nellquit. Tonight we are here both to celebrate Nellquit and our delayed International Women's Day. We are glad to be here in April. April is also Sexual Assault and Rape Prevention Month, so it is really good that we are meeting on April 11th. We are also here to stop violence in our community and to act together to create a safer community. To that end, many of our male allies tonight are in the audience and will join the White Ribbon Campaign with their pledge a little bit later in the program to end violence. Since 1976, New England Learning Center for Women in Transition, fondly known as Nellquit, has worked to build safety, justice, and dignity for all, serving Franklin County and North Quabbin region of Western Mass. Nellquit has provided and continues to provide shelter, counseling, education, and advocacy to families, particularly women and children survivors of domestic violence and sexual abuse. Nellquit also provides education for schools. Indeed, our founding mothers, who had the foresight sitting around a kitchen table and the fortitude to create one of the first battered women's programs in New England. Like activists and other foremothers who worked for women to have the right to vote, to have civil rights, and access to health care, pay equity, and safe working conditions, our foremothers in Franklin County were creative, dedicated, persevering activists. Some of them are still in this room tonight. As activists, they used their heads, their heart, and their hands to make change happen in our community. Nearly every day in Franklin and Hampshire County, an individual calls the 24-hour hotline or seeks shelter temporarily or permanently outside of their home due to violence. Now, 36 years later, we have programs that promote the prevention of violence. Our programs also provide safety and intervention when violence does occur in our families, in our workplaces, in our schools, and in our community. Finally, Nellquit, in collaboration with many other area programs, works on trauma recovery. Every one of us sitting in this room knows someone who has experienced violence, or we ourselves experienced violence. We know that it takes all of us to promote healing and recovery, so all of us need to remember that on a daily basis. So while we revel in our accomplishments, see old friends, have a little wine and beer and water and good food, I want us to celebrate Nellquit, but I want us to also remember to remain vigilant, that our work is not yet done. Tonight we're going to start off with Reverend Dr. Andrea Avazian, who has been with us all 6 years on these International Women's Day celebrations to celebrate Nellquit's work. So if you would join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Andrea Avazian, who will offer some inspirations and reflections.
Thank you, Ann. Greetings, my friends. It is truly my honor and my delight to be with you at Nellquit's 6th Annual International Women's Day celebration. As Ann said, Mary Coachella and I figured out that I have been at every celebration for 6 years since these began, offering a blessing or an invocation or a reflection. Every year it is an honor and a great joy. I am only here this year because the March 7th gathering was snowed out I was in Spain in March, so I would have missed this very special event. However, with this rescheduled celebration, I get to be here, lucky me. And it is actually my time in Spain that I'm going to use as my framework for my brief reflection this evening. Let me explain. I am on a 3-month sabbatical from my church, and for part of my sabbatical, I went and walked the ancient Christian pilgrimage across northern Spain called the Camino de Santiago. The Camino starts in southwest France, crosses the Pyrenees, and proceeds for 500 miles through teeny villages, big cities, hills, meadows, fields, and every type of terrain until finally ending in Santiago de Compostela in western Spain. I walked the Camino in 33 days, 1 day's walking for every day Jesus lived. And I arrived as planned, which is a total miracle, in Santiago on Easter morning. I returned to this country a few days ago. One of the lessons I learned again during my walk across Spain is how interconnected we all are. I know we know this, but I know it again on a deeper level. Supposedly, I was walking the Camino alone, supposedly. I went alone, and often I was alone, but I was aided and cheered, boosted up, and helped in so many ways by so many people. Like the farmer who found me walking on a cow path across his field, ran over and explained where I should be. I was lost, but I didn't know it. He saw my blank expression as he spoke to me. I don't speak Spanish, big mistake. And he walked me a half mile back to where I'd made the wrong turn and set me on the right path. Like the man named Antonio who greeted pilgrims, as we were called, in the hostel in Los Groños, and knelt on his knees and offered foot care and treated blisters and applied plaster and washed and massaged our feet. The foot angel, we called him, would not accept any money. Like the priest in Roncesvalles who called all the pilgrims forward after Mass and individually asked us our names and home countries and then blessed each one of us. There are hundreds and hundreds of examples of acts of kindness and generosity that made it possible for me, supposedly walking the Camino alone, to walk the Camino at all. And the same applies to Nelquit. We are all part of the extended Nelquit family, and we are all interconnected. None of us are walking alone. Some work for Nelquit, some give money to Nelquit, some volunteer at Nelquit, some pray for Nelquit, some remember Nelquit in their wills, some offer consultation, legal advice, or special counsel to Nelquit. Some do dramatic things to support Nelquit, some work quietly behind the scenes, but no one connected to Nelquit is ever walking alone, and no one who turns to Nelquit for help will ever walk alone. We are Nelquit. We're a team, a visible but mostly invisible team, a network, an interconnected body with each one of us contributing something of value, something important, each one of us contributing a large or a small act of kindness and generosity. And because each one of us contributes something important, the whole system works. Having just returned last week from the Camino in Spain, I am so aware and so thankful for our deep connection to each other. And I am so aware this evening of how Nelquit has brought us all together in something that feels like a big old extended family. Thank you for being part of the family. Thank you for doing what needs to be done. Thank you for your work and your words and your witness. Thank you for your generosity. None of us is in this alone. We're interconnected and we're interdependent, and in that lies our power. None of us is walking alone. And because of that simple fact, we are safe on the journey, and we will reach our destination. Praise God. Thank you. Amen.
Amen. I think now it's clear to me that the snowstorm came on purpose, because you were supposed to be here tonight. Thank you very much. Well, next, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker for tonight. A friend of mine used to say that she loves women who are smart and funny. Well, she would love our guest speaker for tonight. Not only is she smart and funny, but she's compassionate and dedicated and a true champion for women and children's rights. I fondly remember meeting Sandy Staub for the first time. She was working for then District Attorney Judd Carhart, and she was the chief of the very first domestic violence unit out of the DA's office and chair of the first DA's domestic violence task force. I was immediately struck by her candor and her passion in dealing with the difficult issues surrounding violence against women at a time, if you remember back, many of us in this room do remember quite well, that was a time when law enforcement and domestic violence advocates were not always working so well together, and it could be challenging times. Since that time, Sandy hasn't stopped making her mark. From 1995 to 1998, she developed her own practice in Greenfield, once again advocating for victims of abuse in civil proceedings. From 1998 to 2010, Sandy served as partner in 2 firms in Western Mass, and currently she has worked since 2010 as legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union Foundation in Connecticut. In this capacity, she directs a complex legal docket and advocates for protection of civil rights and civil liberties. Sandy's a graduate of Greenfield Community College, from Amherst College and Yale Law School. And this past year, as GCC was celebrating their 50th anniversary, Sandy was honored with a Distinguished Alumni Award. Having Sandy here tonight is particularly special, given her longtime connections to Nellquit. We had a moment over here before where Pam Brown and I were standing there, and Sandy was there, and it was just for a moment, it just sort of felt like old times. And Andrea, it's true. That's sort of the beauty of this. Sandy served as legal counsel for Nellquit, volunteered on the board for many years, and also served as the board president. She's clearly here among many friends. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome for Sandy Staub.
Friends, in 1950, an 18-year-old woman left behind a college scholarship and married. By 1959, she had 5 young children and had decided to separate from her husband because his violence and emotional abuse towards her and their children had escalated. She was afraid to stay with him, but she was also afraid of leaving, uncertain of financial support, and also immediately concerned that leaving would cause more harm. And she loved him. Instead of leaving, she accepted her mother-in-law's offer of an all-expense-paid honeymoon to New York, convinced finally that she could stop the violence by being a better wife and mother. During this second honeymoon, I was conceived, and after me, a 7th child, my younger sister, was born. But the violence and the threats to kill my mother and my brothers and sisters and me, the alcohol abuse and treatment, many police visits at our home, and subsequent separations and restraining orders followed. In 1975, he took his own life. As a child, my grief on the loss of my father was overwhelmed by the relief that he had not taken my mother or any of us with him. relief from living in fear. 1975 was also the year that Nellquit founders got together at that kitchen table. The women who created Nellquit wanted to meet the widespread and dire need that is seen in my family's history. In the 1960s and most of the 70s, marital rape was not a crime. Perpetrators of intimate partner violence were not held accountable for their crimes. Restraining orders were hard to obtain and even more difficult to enforce. Perhaps more importantly, there was no community voice speaking to women like my mother that the violence was not her fault, to tell children like me that death was not the only way out. Nellquit and the movement that created it have been able to accomplish a great deal since 1975, and it's important to recognize this progress. But we also need to understand the way that law itself has limited the effectiveness of these accomplishments. In addition to my mother's story, I have selected a few significant legal cases to discuss from the nearly 4 decades since Nellquit was born, to illustrate the law's progress and the way that gender inequality in the law has continued to have lethal consequences. In 1982 and 1983 in Torrington, Connecticut, Tracy Thurman's estranged husband repeatedly committed crimes of violence and property damage against her and made many murderous threats against her and her son. Ms. Thurman obtained a restraining order. After about 8 months of this abuse, in June of 1983, Ms. Thurman called the Torrington Police Department to ask them to arrest her husband for violation of his probation. After 15 minutes, the police had not arrived, and she went outside to confront him and persuade him not to hurt their child. Ms. Thurman's husband stabbed her repeatedly. 25 minutes after her call, one police officer arrived, and in the officer's presence, while holding the knife, Ms. Thurman's husband kicked her in the head, went into the residence, came out with the child, and dropped the child on his bleeding mother. He was not arrested until after he continued to threaten her and approached her while she was lying on a stretcher. Tracy Thurman survived and eventually brought a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Torrington and named individuals that the actions of the police had deprived her of her constitutional right as a woman to equal protection of the laws. The defendants moved to dismiss her complaint, arguing that equal protection of the laws in the United States Constitution only prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, and that it did not support her claim. The Federal District Court in Connecticut denied the motion to dismiss, finding that Ms. Thurman's allegation that the city had a pattern and practice of failing to act to protect women who had complained of abuse by their husbands supported her equal rights claim. Her argument, Tracy Thurman's argument that gender equality is a civil right, prevailed in that case. The impact of her private legal victory that she could bring an equal protection claim cannot be overstated. It was progress, and it inspired mandatory arrest policies and better abuse prevention laws in many states. Here in Massachusetts, we relied on that decision for our trainings in police departments, even in early 1990. Also in 1994, after the Thurman decision, the Violence Against Women Act was passed, and it incorporated a civil right based on gender equality. And the quote is, "All persons within the United States shall have the right to be free from crimes of violence motivated by gender." And it also provided, the Violence Against Women Act provided a private right of action for women who were victims of gender-based violence. Better domestic violence laws alone, though, did not eliminate domestic violence, much as the 13th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause did not eliminate racism. First Jim Crow and now mass incarceration of people of color show that. As Frederick Douglass so famously put it, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. In Massachusetts, as elsewhere, when confronted with the mandatory arrest laws, streamlined restraining order procedure, and no-drop criminal policies, the legal system's resistance from within was inevitable. Krista Contact was one who suffered as a result. In 1996, Ms. Contact came to court here in Greenfield to apply for a restraining order against her boyfriend, who had beaten her so badly that she had gone to the hospital. She described to the court a history of violence during a 3.5-year relationship. She told the court that in the week since she had been beaten, she fled town, and she only came to court that day because she knew he would be there to face other charges. Even though she waited a week to come to court, her injuries were still visible during the hearing. The judge indicated to Ms. Contact that he was not inclined to issue the restraining order. She told the judge she was in fear, and she asked him, "How do I know he's not going to do something when I walk out of this courtroom?" And the judge responded, "Miss, I have no idea what I'm going to do when I walk out of this courtroom." The judge denied her request for protection. After the hearing had concluded and the parties were walking away from the judge, Ms. Contact gestured with her middle finger toward her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend. The judge saw this, called her up to the court, held her in summary contempt, and put her in jail. She spent 10 days in jail. The ACLU of Massachusetts and Nelquit teamed up to write a brief in support of Ms. Contact on appeal, and we obtained an appellate decision that vacated the contempt ruling. The decision also said that just about everything that this judge had done in this restraining order hearing was wrong and inconsistent with the law's purpose of protecting victims of abuse, not only from the perpetrator, but from mistreatment in the court. And even though Ms. Contact did not get her 10 days back, the reported decision with her name on it has had an important impact on preserving progress. After Ms. Thurman and Ms. Contact both survived to fight and ultimately win their legal battles, grounded on concepts of gender equality, the United States Supreme Court decided first that Congress had no power to provide women with a private right of action for gender-based violence, and that women had no constitutionally protected interest in the enforcement of restraining orders. And those two cases are Gonzalez and Morrison. Morrison, in 2000, the rape victim had brought claims under the Violence Against Women Act, and these were proven rape events. The Supreme Court of the United States held in 2000 that neither the Commerce Clause nor the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution gave Congress the power to pass that law that gave her a private right of action. In doing so, Congress ignored the massive evidence Congress considered when it first passed the Violence Against Women Act, evidence that pervasive gender-based stereotypes hampered many state legal systems, sometimes unconstitutionally so, giving rise for the need for the Violence Against Women Act and the private right of action. The rapists in the Morrison case successfully challenged Congress's authority to provide a civil rights remedy for victims of gender-based violence. In other words, the rapist in 2000 prevailed on the arguments that had failed against the city of Torrington. In another case, Jessica Gonzalez, now Miss Lanahan, brought a civil rights claim against the town of Castle Rock, Colorado, based on her allegations that the town officers had failed to respond properly to her repeated reports that her estranged husband was violating her restraining order. And Colorado had a mandatory arrest policy. Ms. Lanahan had alleged that her husband had taken their 3 children in violation of the order nearly 7 hours after her husband had confirmed to her that he had taken the children and after Ms. Lanahan had asked the officers repeatedly for help. The children were found murdered in his truck in front of the police station. By the time Ms. Lanahan's case made it to the Supreme Court of the United States in 2005, the rapists in the Morrison case had prevailed in their challenge to the Violence Against Women Act based on gender equality. And so the lawyers for Ms. Lanahan had to find another way to argue to the Supreme Court that she should have been protected, that her children should have been protected. And Ms. Lanahan argued that she had a property interest in the restraining order, and that Castle Rock had violated her due process rights when they failed to respond to the order, that the government had taken her property interest without due process in violation of the Constitution. The defendants in Castle Rock moved to dismiss the complaint, and unlike in Thurman, the defendants prevailed. The complaint was dismissed, the Supreme Court agreed with that result, and Ms. Lanahan had no remedy. Without a gender equality provision in our Constitution or the ability to claim gender equality as a civil right, Ms. Thurman's and Ms. Contact's victories have been jeopardized by the Morrison and Gonzalez decisions. States can still pass laws to protect victims of domestic violence, but without civil rights remedies, the progress of mandatory arrest and streamlined restraining order procedure has been jeopardized. As one scholar put it, the court simultaneously ignored and voided the accountability and security that sparked the early movement to improve American response to domestic violence, recalling a recent time in the country's history when men could violate and beat their wives without legal consequence. But Ms. Lenahan's story does not end with the Supreme Court of the United States. After exhausting her U.S. remedies with the help of the ACLU and advocates like those in this room, Ms. Lenahan petitioned the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to review her case, and in 2011, that commission reported that the United States had violated Jessica Lenahan's human rights, as well as the rights of other abuse survivors throughout the country. Citing the Morrison and Gonzalez decisions, the Commission acknowledged that the United States, quote, might have improperly narrowed the remedies available to domestic violence survivors in legal proceedings against government officials. While legislative developments like the Violence Against Women Act of 1994 are positive, the Commission said, the Supreme Court has left victims of domestic violence with no constitutional or statutory remedy when police are grossly negligent. The Commission called for new policies and legal approaches that would mandate enforcement of precautionary measures to benefit survivors, better protect children, and help to restructure discriminatory sociocultural patterns that compromise survivors' safety. We need to incorporate these international human rights into our domestic law. We need to work towards gender equality as a constitutional right, and we need NELQUIT and the ACLU and others to continue to lead the battle for these goals. In the meantime, domestic violence continues to threaten women and children in our communities, and NELQUIT must continue its day in and day out work to support women and children in transition to safety. NELQUIT was created and exists because we live in a society in which gender inequality is enshrined in our Constitution, recognized by our highest and other courts, perpetuated in pay disparities and numerous other ways. Until there is true gender equality in law and in fact, we need NELQUIT. We need NELQUIT to be the daily champion for women and children who, because of that fundamental societal and legal inequality, suffer and fear for their lives. We need NELQUIT for Billy Staub, for Tracy Thurman, for Jessica Lenahan, for Krista Contact, and for the survivors and all of us. Thank you.
I do want to thank you all for coming, and I want to actually thank some of our sponsors that are listed on the back of your program, but we wanted to thank them personally. So Andy's and the Oak Shop, Clinical and Support Options, Franklin County Home Care Corporation, Franklin First Credit Union, the Law Office of Lawrence Farber, Greenfield Community College Diversity Committee, Greenfield Cooperative Bank, Interfaith Council of Franklin County, Margot Jones Architect, Jerry LeBlanc, Lesser Newman and Nasser, Men's Resource Center, Nonprofit Data Management, Scholar, Abbott and Presser, Voicemail Magazine, Steve Mulch, florist. We want to thank Steve for all the flowers on the table. And Ann, do you have somebody else?
No, I just want to make sure that we are all grateful and thankful to the Friends of NELQUIT, whom I could not do my job without. Ruth Anderson Zaber, Ruth Gallagher, Mary Kachella, Susan Manette, Rob Oken. And also to the Board of Directors of NELQUIT, Barbara Bodson, Mary Jo Corfage, Gretchen Krull, Heather McGuire, Susan Manette, and Rob Oken, and we are always looking for volunteers and help. And the purple sheet's on your table if you have interest. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for coming this evening, and we hope you will continue to move in the community and do good work.
Actually, and there's one more thing. Okay, so we're doing impromptu, and everyone's going, oh, this is like a love fest, and it is. So I'd like the staff of Nellquit to come up, please. So these are some of the people that Zoraida was referring to. Sharon, that includes you. Please come up. So one of the things that, is everyone here? No. Okay, come on, Sharon. Okay. So one of the things that we realize, and we have not formally introduced you to our director. This is our fabulous, wonderful director. This is Cheryl Rogers, and she is amazing. The staff really wanted to make sure that we let you all know how fabulous she is, and that really the agency is growing and is more powerful than ever because of her leadership. She is all the wonderful details, all the wonderful thank you notes, everything, all the great fundraising. We couldn't do it without Cheryl. We're all incredibly grateful to have her, and we wanted you all to have an opportunity to say hello.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And I was trying to make my way around the room so I could personally get to say hi to everyone. There's so many friends here, and it's just going to be an honor for me to get to meet and to get to know all of you. So thank you for coming.